Hello, folks, and welcome to HiSTORIES, the greatest show on cable TV. Joining us today are three nations who have a bit of a rocky history, but who's to say you can't get past your disagreements, even if they almost caused nuclear Armageddon? So, Cuba, tell us how it all began.
Castro was an up-and-coming power when he and his Fidelistas were known around the country, especially after his notorious Moncada raid occurred. Because of that, this event politically succeeded. Later, the Soviets approached me with the idea of some kind of friendship. I gladly took this offer because it's like sitting at the cool kids table at lunch, you know? The United States wanted no part of me, as predicted, but I didn't want any part of them because I preferred an anti-American platform, so it's all good. I look towards Africa to expand Cuban power. However, the United States, being the little vermins that they are, first backed out of our deal with oil and sugar, and then they had the audacity to place an embargo on us. What are we, caged tigers in a zoo? This Platt amendment has been grinding my gears. And then the United States does everything between the Bay of Pigs and Operation Mongoose, starting in 1961, to get rid of the great Castro. So do you know what I'm going to do next? I'm going to work with Khrushchev and the rest of the USSR on something to really test the United States, nuclear warfare.
Wow, that's interesting. Now let's see what the USA has to say.
Everything was fine until Fidel Castro came to power in 1959. Until that year, Cuba was a country I knew I could take down if I wanted to. It was no threat to my country, considering our nuclear superiority. But this all changed in the year 1959. That was the first time I viewed Cuba as a threat. I felt that my control on Cuba was slipping further and further, especially because Cuba and the USSR started to become friends. When Castro encouraged revolution in Latin America and Africa, I knew that I had to take action if I wanted to keep any of my power over the country. So my immediate action was to institute an embargo in October of 1960. I knew that doing so would devastate Cuba's economy because the country is heavily reliant on the sugar industry. Sadly, this didn't work because Cuba was still receiving help from the USSR, and its economy didn't crash like I hoped it would. So I broke off all diplomatic relations with Cuba and realized that I had to take a different approach. I called in the CIA, the only people I knew could help me kick Cuba's butt. They led the Bay of Pigs invasion in January 1961 by using Cuban exiles, but failed to overthrow Castro. After the failed invasion, I was feeling disheartened, but I didn't give up. Later that year, I ordered the CIA to lead another covert operation on Cuba, known as Operation Mongoose. I hoped this would remove the communists from power, but sadly it didn't. I was very, very unhappy.
So, what does the USSR think so far? The year was 1953, and I had heard about a man named Fidel Castro who led a failure of an attack on the Moncada barracks in Cuba. But he was a communist, the first in the West, so I did my duty as the father of communism, and I decided to take him under my wing and lead him to victory, because I heard that might count for CAS hours. It was now 1959, and Castro had taken power over the island of Cuba. Being the kind-hearted and resourceful individual that I am, I took little Cuba and tried to nurture it, and coaxed it to spread my communist ideals. But oh, they grow up so quickly. They suck up all of your money, just like a sponge.
Hey, USSR.
Yeah, what?
I had a deal with the United States.
I hate these guys.
Me too. Because they backed out on my deal, and now I need a place to get oil. Can you hit me up?
Yeah, I heard that you have sugar.
That's true.
Can I have some? I like to make cakes. Baking is my passion. So I have some oil. I think this is a pretty fair deal. It's a pretty even amount of money. You want to trade? Let's shake on it. It's a deal.
It's a pleasure working with you.
Bye. I was still so young and so foolish. My time with Cuba didn't do anything for me except make me anxious and make me seem somewhat respectable to the rest of the world for putting up with it. The next year, in January of 1961, the U.S. launched a failed invasion of Cuba, leading ex-Cuban patriots to the beach and then abandoning them. I suppose Mr. Kennedy thought this would be a good idea, and I thank him because it allowed me to begin my construction on the greatest progress of all time, the Berlin Wall. Of course, the Americans didn't like this, but I couldn't have all of East Berlin running away to the west now, could I? Up until 1962, Cuba and I were, let's say, cooperating, although Castro was quickly realizing what he could do with his power and no longer wanted to obey me. I thought I might give him a few missiles, just as an incentive to remember me, but then the U.S. found out.
What a great segue. Wow, those three different perspectives are just intriguing. Now, I understand that in 1962, a very pivotal event occurred called the Cuban Missile Crisis. So now I will let the three explain their views on the topic. Let's go.
The missile crisis. What an iconic time in our history. Here's what really happened. So in 62, our good pal Khrushchev sent us missiles for nuclear bases as well as nuclear weapons secretly. This was known as Operation Anager, but the public later found out about this. So Khrushchev said it was for defensive purposes. But who are we kidding? Anyways, Kennedy freaked out, but we were just trying to restore a great country, and the USSR is helping us along the way. And sure, the missiles were in range of American cities, but it's just nuclear weapons. I mean, there's probably a lot worse in the world. But to be honest, Kennedy had it coming because he is a complete idiot who does not know how to run a country. So then he decides to quarantine us again. Then the United States and the USSR make a deal without me, surprise, surprise. And Khrushchev has to take the nukes out, and Kennedy will no longer invade us. But guess who ignores their end of the deal? The United States. Yup. They continue to treat us like we are nothing, even though I asked for them to put an end to the embargo, as well as military restrictions and attacks.
I wonder what the U.S. thinks about this.
As you all know by now, Cuba and I were having some issues in the late 1950s. The USSR and I weren't on the best of terms either. I think our rocky relationship is what led to a very dangerous moment in history, known today as the Cuban Missile Crisis. I have to admit, Castro's promises to restore freedom and national pride to the people of Cuba scared me. When he wanted to visit the United States, I refused to meet with him, stating that I was too busy to do so. But in reality, I was scared. So scared. I was so worried about the country's security that I sent U-2 spy planes to Cuba and found that my fear was justified. The pictures that the plane took showed a nuclear missile site being built by the Soviets. And even worse, almost every American city was within range of nuclear missiles launched from Cuba. To protect my country, I knew I had to strike a deal. So in October of 1962, I pledged not to invade Cuba and promised to dismantle its Jupiter missiles in Turkey if the USSR would withdraw its nuclear missiles from Cuba. This was an excellent decision because both the USSR and I were able to avert the nuclear war and entered a period of stability.
I doubt that the Soviet Union came to the same conclusion.
After Mr. JFK so kindly asked me to remove my missiles from the Cuban premises, I had insisted that he disband his blockade around Cuba so that everything could go back to normal. The rest of the world saw me as someone who was incapable of making my own decisions. I had let the Americans knock me to the ground, stomp all over me, and jump up and down repeatedly. This disaster severely hurt my relationship with my frenemy China up until 1991, when I was disbanded and became known as Russia. China published some really nasty articles about me. Khrushchev was ruined and removed from power in 1964, but I wasn't going to let my entire nation be dragged down.
Nobody can drag me down.
Vic, I swear. Don't.
Don't what?
You're laughing.
At her.
But I wasn't going to let my entire nation be dragged down.